Welcome back to our Monday special discussion tonight, where we focus on former U.S. President Barack Obama, whose very short visit in the country has concluded today. And I'll be speaking to political scientists. To my left, Dr. Wanjiru Kamau Rotenberg. To my immediate right is Mark Bichachi, who is a communication strategist. And next to him, Dr. Sam Kamau, who is a political analyst. And you're all welcome to the program. Listen to what the former president had to say today in his, if you like, native home, Kogelo.
Despite some of the tumultuous times that seem to attend every election, we now have a president and a major opposition leader who have pledged to build bridges and have made specific commitments to work together. It means rooting out the corruption that weakens civic life. It means no longer seeing different ethnicities as enemies or rivals, but rather as allies, and seeing the diversity of tribes not as a weakness, but as a strength.
And that one statement pretty much summed up what concerns have been regarding the state of the country, be it corruption, be it negative ethnic politics, and also, you know, the violence that follows, and a near complete breakdown of society. Dr. Rotenberg, let me start with you. What do you think about his very carefully picked statements in Kenya?
I think the tone was apt, was right. You could sense a difference in tone from the last time he was here as president, a celebration perhaps of some of the distance we've walked, but also very clear in the ways ahead, the distance ahead.
Mm-hmm. And his reference in particular to the Building Bridges initiative, and if we were to take it back to the meetings that he chose to have here on a private visit with the president and with the NASA leader, what does that tell you about, you know, the import, if you like, of the Building Bridges initiative, at least to the outside world when they're watching Kenya's politics?
I would actually flip that a bit and talk about different bridges that he came here to build himself. If you look at what he actually came here to do, local politics didn't seem as big on his agenda as really this conversation and this the thread that has run through his presidency and his days since the presidency around leadership, youth in leadership, the need to invest in young people. I think those are the bridges I saw here. I would focus on.
Okay, Dr. Kamau.
Well, I would say there's always this freshness around Obama, and looked at his speech, like you said, very measured, but still focusing on things that are always dear to him. You know, he oozes this positive energy around issues, talks about opportunities for young people, talks about hope, talks about young people making meaning out of their lives, talks about giving people an opportunity to do what they could do, talks about service to humanity, serving our communities and all that. I think that for me was very important, but he again went into the issues around governance, spoke about corruption. I remember when he was here, I think some 3 years back, it was a bit, you know, tough on the government on the issue of corruption, but now acknowledged at least a bit of the progress that has been made, but still identified corruption as a big issue that we still have to clearly deal with.
But the idea, though, Mark, that, in an interview earlier this week with his sister Auma, you know, she said as much that, you know, he very closely monitored Kenya's politics and still does, and that forms part of their conversations about the country. And now being, you know, a former U.S. president, you know, what is the weight of that? You know, is the term former U.S. president equivalent to former president anywhere else in the world? And what kind of, you know, what kind of signal should that give us in terms of the impact that a former U.S. head of state can have still on affairs here at home?
Barack Obama is an interesting former president in two regards. Number one, he's a fresh former president, and number two, the Americans are having serious buyer's remorse. They're really regretting Donald Trump, especially after he sided with Russia today. So it's interesting that Barack Obama, in fact, over the weekend, there were very many tweets from Americans saying, we miss Obama. So Obama still holds the heart of Americans, especially Americans towards the left of politics. And then number two, Barack Obama in Kenya holds a lot of soft power in the minds of Kenyans. So whatever he has to say has a lot of gravitas and weight as far as how the political discourse goes in this country. And therefore what he said is very interesting, because it shows someone who has his finger to the pulse of the Kenyan discourse and the Kenyan discussion. Because number one, he understands that if you're going to solve anything in this country, then a handshake between Uhuru Kenyatta and Raila Odinga had to happen. Number two, he also understands that corruption is a very big monster. But the key thing is, he saw what was the salient point. The salient point being that the president himself has been spearheading the fight against corruption, and he recognized that. So he sees the opportunity, and he also understands now, as a former leader of the United States, the opportunity that is latent in the Kenyan people, the opportunity that is latent in the Kenyan youth, the opportunity that is latent in a country that pays 600 billion plus in corruption payments, but still manages to move forward. So the potential of converting that to usable resources for the country then puts Kenya on a totally different map to the rest of the continent. So that interest is very clear in his speech. And of course, we cannot forget the initiative that the sister is trying to do, and the fact that he emphasized that the youth of this country, by the way, where in Siaya, where you have more than 50% unemployment among youth, it is very critical and very symbolic that you'd start such a program there, and not the usual cliche of starting it in Mathare or Kibera.
I was going to add something maybe to what Mark has said. Obama has never shied away from his Kenyan heritage. He actually makes reference to it, you know, even today. I think he mentioned a couple of times, and how he actually came and felt, you know, like he had found some meaning, and you know, in the pursuit of trying to understand, to look for his identity. But I think one thing that has been very consistent, and Obama is such a contrast in many ways, relatively young, we would say at 56, where I think many African leaders, that will be the time they are preparing to go into politics. You know, he's retired earlier in a sense, but has remained relevant. But I think one of the things he embodies, and is quite unique, is what you'd call value-based leadership. The things he keeps talking about, the aspirations of what it is you can do for the community. And I think part of what he is doing in his now, you know, post-retirement after the presidency, going around Africa, because like I said earlier, is a sense of renewal, is a sense of hope, because when you look at him, in a sense, although this is more of his father, who is a child of charity, somebody was given an opportunity, but an opportunity that eternally changed his life, not only his life, but that of generations after. And I think that is what he embodies. And when he talks about now the audacity of hope, when you look at Obama, what he represents to the Kenyan youth, and talks about opportunities that perhaps, just like any other young person in Kenya, in whichever part of Africa, is about giving them opportunities and nurturing those dreams that would actually amount to something.
You know, Auma talked about this week the value of the name, and recognizing the fact that the name has, I mean, it's been her own work, but the name has allowed her, you know, certain strides, has helped her in that respect. But she also said to me that she knows very much that is time-based. And I wonder if you think, even in his coming, I mean, yes, he's a former head of state, and perhaps that does, you know, reduce a little bit of the clout. But do you think the value of and the impact of the Obama name on Kenyans is the same?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, it's still a big deal.
I agree with Sam that it's a name that still has cachet. The convoy, the motorcade might be smaller, but there are certain things that President Obama can tell Kenyans that I think very few other world leaders can tell us, and we listen.
Like what?
I think issues around corruption, but he also and I hear that the need to embrace and pull him into our camps, but he also threw out some very serious challenges. And these are things that we as Kenyans really need to think hard about. Why is it that a private philanthropic foundation is building a youth center? Isn't that the work of government? Isn't that the work of our county governments? Are there other, shouldn't there be 47 youth centers across this country? So on one hand, it's important to celebrate the son of our soil, but at the same time, his very presence and what he came to do, to open a youth center, is also an indictment on us and what we haven't done yet.
In the same breath, I mean, a lot was said about, you know, the purpose of the center being to get young people to take the lead, you know, to really own their lives, their choices, their consequences, to work with their hands, to not rely on anyone, to not wait on anyone. And, you know, statements like that were greeted, you know, with mixed reaction. On the one hand, some were saying, look, you've never done anything for us anyway. On the other, others said, you know, that's right, empower us and we can get it on our own. What do you think of that?
He's not Kenya's president. He told us that
you have no obligation.
He told us the first time he came, when he was a senator, he told us, senator in Chicago,
Yes.
Then he came again and he told us, I'm president of who? United States of America.
Yes.
Mujisot. He's come back, and we are the ones who keep expecting him to behave as if,
in fact,
to be our de facto president, perhaps.
In fact, that's the very reason why you open a youth center, because Africans in general act as if they do not have bootstraps to pull themselves up with. The expectation of an angel, the expectation of a God to save you, the expectation of a government to save you is the nonsense of Africa. We are either giving cockerels to
maybe
witch
not
doctors.
A government to save you, but a government to work for you.
I'm including the witch doctor. I'm including the preacher who asks for your tithe on Sunday. I'm including the government, because one of the things that Africans are always doing, they're always waiting for someone else to pick them up. And my question is, who was there for Australia to pick them up? Who was there for, you know, the truth of the matter is this. No, listen to me very carefully. At the end of the day, Africa and Africans have to get to the realization that we either decide to pick ourselves up, because let me tell you, wrong skin color. There is no sympathy for this one. Look at when we want to go to Europe, there's an immigrant crisis. When they're coming here, it is tourism. Okay, so let's understand, no one out there is watching out for Africans. We are by ourselves, and the idea that American money is going to come here and change anything, it won't. We have 6 million NGOs which spend 6 months requesting for funds and another 3 months paying their own salaries before they do one project a year. They are not going to change anything. Africa is for Africans, and our problems are ours, and the sooner we realize that, and the more money we save taking tithe to church or cockerels to witch doctors and actually invest in business, we will be much better.
I like what Mark is saying, but I've been tracking conversations online which points, you know, have brought out some of the negative sentiments. And you remember Dr. Auma herself came under fire trying to espouse some of the things that Mark is talking about, in a sense that there are people who may have been disappointed that, you know, this was supposed to be a begging mission where we stand, and is almost our culture. You know, if the president visits, leaders will line up and say, we have this problem, we have this issue, please help us sort it out. And I think Obama coming and just inspiring young people that you can actually solve your own problems, you can actually begin to take initiative. Maybe it's something we have not developed very well, a culture of what I would call civic participation, where citizens are actively engaged in trying to resolve some of the issues. In my neighborhood the other day, I saw young people coming together. I started by just forming our subgroup and talking about issues like security, talking about the bad roads and sewer. And for some reason, after making some noise on WhatsApp, the political leaders, the MCA took interest, the MP actually took interest. When they called for a meeting, and these young people basically driving the whole agenda. And I think this is part of what these youth centers can show, that young people can actually build their social capital, because Kenya is a youthful country, basically, just like the rest of Africa. I believe, given the right platforms and opportunities, perhaps this is what this youth center is supposed to do. Inspire young people, create a platform where they come together. He said it serves about 800 youth, weekly. I believe by coming together, identifying common issues that they could actually handle. I know the government must do its part, but I would want to say that there's also the bit where we can also take initiatives. And what happened is after these young people called for a meeting, the elected leaders came, and the following week I saw roads being made. It's actually possible. And here's part of what Obama sought to inspire in young people.
Doctor, you seem to have something to say to Mark.
In terms of kind of people off the continent coming to rescue us, I absolutely agree. What I find a bit more challenging, and actually what I disagree with, to be more direct, is the piece about the bootstraps. I don't think it is too much to ask and to demand and to expect that government works. It's not too much to expect that when you go to a dispensary, there be medicine, that when you turn on the switch, there be electricity. Heck, that there be a switch that you can turn on. So some of these, I think we need to be careful not to place blame on youth for not bootstrapping it, but rather to say
placing blame on the government, because it's the government's job. The biggest beggars on the continent are not youth, it is our governments. Okay, they beg from China, they beg from the West, they beg every day. So the people who need to pick themselves up by the bootstraps are our governments. Our governments are not creative. You think about this country. We want to create jobs for youth. If you give a youth 100,000 shillings and he wants to run a business legally, by the time he's done paying the lawyer's fees for registration, NSSF, NHIF, and paying exorbitant rent, that 100,000 shillings is gone. This is why we can't collect taxes, because with the 100,000 shillings, they'd rather go get a bale of Chinese clothes, American rejected clothes in Gikomba, and come sell. Why? Because no one in government is thinking creatively enough to understand that if we're going to empower the youth, there are certain things that must happen in a country as impoverished as our own. And we must borrow from Barack Obama's legacy. You see, if you read Barack Obama's story, from the inception of his career, he's been consistent about helping youth and helping communities. In Kenya, the only time our politicians help communities is when they're doing handouts on the top of their pickup trucks for 500 shillings or 50 shillings for people attending their things. That is not philanthropy. That is preparation for greed. That is sheep going for the slaughter.
Fair enough. To finish your point.
No, that my point was that the need to separate the role of government and to not that private philanthropy should not absorb government, absorb government from its role providing social services, building the youth centers.
Finally, what do you think his legacy has been on Africa? And I say this, bearing in mind what Kizza Besigye said today and has been saying for a while about the impact of the Western world on our politics, that they've been interested more in stability than in electoral justice. While he was president, he had some, choice words then. Do you think he's said enough? And in measurable terms, what would you say his impact has been here?
I would pick that up. I think Obama, from the very beginning of his presidency, one, told us, I'm president of the United States, not of Kenya. Let's be clear. Two, he was very clear about trade, not aid. And his policy prescriptions, what his government did as policy reflected that. Aid went down. There were certain key initiatives. There was Feed the Future, which is a major agricultural initiative that the organization I run is a part of that. There was Power Africa, but for the most part, the orientation was towards building Africa's capacity to trade. And you didn't see the aid of the Bush years around PEPFAR. So he did what he said he would do, and his legacy in terms of that it was trade and then youth leadership. Those are the two things I would identify.
For Kenya and the continent?
I would say in terms of Obama's legacy, maybe much of what he's likely to do is through the Obama Foundation and the work that he is doing after he's done with the presidency. And he actually acknowledged that in a sense he was limited when he was president, because he was actually primarily elected to work for Americans.
Right.
But in the sense now, when you look at the kind of work he is doing, even the fact that he's gone to South Africa, again, he was talking about leadership. perhaps in the area of governance and trying to motivate and inspire not only just young people in Kenya and the rest of Africa, but in terms of nurturing leaders, new leaders through the Obama Foundation and some of these initiatives in terms of strengthening structures around governance and accountability. And maybe the one important thing that I would want to perhaps mention is on the issue of corruption, which he has spoken about. He understands that actually corruption is a big issue, not just in Kenya, but in Africa. And since we are talking about young people, and we will say corruption has robbed the young people of their future, these opportunities now, when you talk about these things, trying to nurture maybe value-based leadership in emerging leaders, leaders for the future, perhaps his impact and his legacy is around that, not so much what he did as president, because as she has correctly pointed out, aid started, reducing and going down in his presidency, and I think with Trump it's even gone down further. But the work that he will continue doing across the continent, I think we are going to see the fruits with time.
Mark, sorry if I may pose a different question to you, because you are a communications specialist, and in conclusion, the fact that people feel they didn't see him, in one of the stories we ran, a lady was saying, where were the big screens, why didn't he pop out of the, the hoodie and say hello? And then, there was enormous security detail around how everything was planned. It was a nightmare for journalists, vetted and revetted, and the extra, it was really, I don't want to use the word over the top, but it was right up there with whilst he was still president, and people feel they didn't see him. He came, he went. Who was he here for again? Perhaps people not completely appreciating that it was a private visit. Do you think, communications-wise, that was the right direction to go or not?
It was quite a tricky situation in terms of bringing Barack Obama to Kenya to launch Sauti Kuu, because many Kenyans today will not remember Sauti Kuu because Barack Obama is such a huge brand, and the balance there was difficult. And then if you looked at his language in terms of what he was trying to communicate, he was almost trying to shed the attention from himself onto the project, because that is going to be there for the people after he goes. The wave will pass, but the center will be there, and that's really what he was trying to drive home. That's why in Nairobi he did not spend so much time in Nairobi. He went straight there because he wanted the attention to be there. But because of the grandeur of his name, it is quite difficult to move the lens from him onto Sauti Kuu. We do not have stories of who Sauti Kuu has supported or what it has done, but that's the danger of bringing a figure as big as Barack Obama. If you bring Eminem to highlight a concert, I am very sure you will not be. Did
you say Eminem? Now we know how old you are.
Yes. I was actually privy
I can't say attention. So, but in a nutshell, what is key, by the way, is
don't worry, I don't even know the other fellow.
Yes. So Barack Obama's visit into Kenya, let's not forget his soft power. Number one, his soft power in terms of just being able to influence the youth. The second part is he influenced a lot of policy for the positivity of Africa. We have a lot of things we can export today to the United States tax-free thanks to Obama. Unfortunately, Kenya has not exploited any of those opportunities. But thirdly, we need to remember that during the Barack Obama years, we received a lot of military aid. We don't talk about that, but he did help a lot of our militaries.
We're taking a break. We're back after this.